good mixed martial arts fans, combat sports fans? Ryan Thomas here on the Thomas Take Sports podcast, back once again to provide you with my UFC picks, my UFC 273 fight picks. Tomorrow night, Saturday night, of course, UFC 273. The UFC is back on pay-per-view, ESPN Plus pay-per-view. That is with some awesome fights for fight fans to enjoy. And I know one thing, I not only enjoy the fights, I enjoy trying to predict the fights, preview the fights, give my thoughts on the matchups going into fight night, and giving my thoughts on who I believe will come out on top and why. Is one of my favorite features on my podcast, whether it is the prediction portion or the post-fight reaction portion, which I love to put out the following day on Sundays, giving my post-fight reaction to the bouts. For all combat sports coverage, follow along with the Thomas Take Sports podcast featuring fight predictions, pre- and post-fight reactions, and listen to yours truly, Ryan Thomas, play MMA matchmaker, providing you who I believe these fighters should fight coming off of a win or loss. So I was talking with a good buddy of mine, and that would be none other than Christian Printup. And we were talking about the fights themselves from the last pay-per-view. And when I'm talking about the last pay-per-view, we're talking about the next pay-per-view too that gets thrown into the conversation. And I'm looking at this card get built slowly but surely, the UFC 273 fight card. And I say to myself, wow, this slowly but surely worked out to its advantage in terms of fighters being available more so this fight card than what they were the last fight card. You know, sometimes it's more of a scheduling thing where certain fighters just can't compete based on their schedule or training and all sorts of stuff. There's a lot of factors at play, but that's neither here nor there. But it does dictate who really is competing on a card and why. And in this instance, I think this is a great card. I want to start off with Mackenzie Dern and Tasha Torres. Mackenzie Dern trains out of Jason Perillo's gym. Jason Perillo is a good buddy of mine who I've talked to several times on Facebook and social media. He's one of the best trainers in the world today. I truly feel like not only one of the best trainers, but in particular, one of the best striking coaches that the world has seen in recent years. Just based on what he has done for guys like BJ Penn, Tito Ortiz, Luke Rockhold, Michael Bisping, and now Mackenzie Dern. Mackenzie Dern is known as a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, where she gets her wins on the ground. She's a submission artist. She gets rear naked chokes. She gets arm bars, triangle chokes, all sorts of stuff. And over the last few fights, she's actually knocked out several of her opponents or badly hurt several of her opponents on the feet, working to the ground to then get the submission, which is her bread and butter. This fight for her, with a win over Tasha Torres, and for Tasha Torres with a win over Mackenzie Dern, I think it puts them right into the thick of things as far as being in the running for a title shot. But this is an experienced fighter in Tasha Torres that I think Mackenzie Dern hasn't quite fought yet. She's fought some very experienced fighters, but Tasha Torres has fought the who's who. And this is a test for Mackenzie Dern. But I think Mackenzie Dern is one of those fighters that she's finally putting it together, that she doesn't have to just rely on her ground game. She can rely on her ground game or rely on her stand-up to then work to her ground game, which is very advantageous these last few fights for her. It shows the evolution that she's had in her last few fights. She did come off a loss in her last bout. And sometimes for me, I'm not afraid to pick a fighter that's coming off of a loss. That doesn't mean that she's done by any stretch of the imagination. I think it means, in all honesty, quite the opposite, that she's got a lot left. So I'm going with Mackenzie Dern for that one. That's my pick. My fight pick is Dern versus Torres. I'm going with Dern. Gilbert Burns versus Khamzat Chimaev. Nobody, not even Conor McGregor, not even Chael Sonnen, not even John Jones, I've never seen a rise quite like this with Khamzat Chimaev, who's fought as often as he has over the course of that 2020 year during the COVID-19 pandemic. When it first started, Khamzat felt like he was fighting, It felt like Khamzat was fighting every single day. It felt like he was fighting every week on every card. He was fighting just, working his way up, climbing the ladder, fighting at 170, fighting at 185. And I think that you want to talk about, what I said in the last fight breakdown with Dern and Torres, Khamzat versus Gilbert Burns. This is Khamzat's biggest test. And this is a massive, massive risk, I think, business-wise, for one Gilbert Burns, because Gilbert Burns is ranked number 2 in the world. Khamzat Chimaev is ranked 11th in the world at welterweight. So if Gilbert Burns loses this fight, he's moving down the ladder as far as getting knocked down a few pegs, losing this fight. And dare I say it, styles make fights. We hear that a lot, but I think skill sets really make a matchup different in comparison. And that skill set of Khamzat is that he's much larger going into a fight than Gilbert Burns is. And I think that is going to give Gilbert Burns a lot of problems based on the fact that Gilbert Burns has recently fought at lightweight, 155, whereas Khamzat has fought as high as 185 and trains with a guy by the name of Dern, who could fight at 205, honestly, and fights at 185. So I think Khamzat Chimaev has a massive size advantage that isn't being really discussed heading into this fight. I know both of these guys weighed in today at 170 pounds, and yeah, that's all well and good, but come fight time, there's that day and a half that you have to bulk back up again, and few fighters have done it as well as Khamzat in terms of cutting weight to get to 170 and then bulking back up to 190, 188, 192 in that range to be big for his fight. And I think this hype, we talk about hype a lot with certain athletes. I think hype is the wrong word with Khamzat Chimaev. I think it is a little bit of a takeover in the sense that few fighters have been able to understand how to grasp the attention of the combat sports fans. And he's one of them. He's one of them. Dare I say it, he's one of them. He has not fought in a number 1 contender fight. This is the biggest fight of his career for obvious reasons. Gilbert Burns has fought in not only a number 1 contender fight, he won that fight and lost a title fight against a former training partner of his, Kamaru Usman. So Burns is essentially looking to get back on track from that loss, even though he's been active since. But get back on track against a guy that people know so that it helps his notoriety in becoming known and moving forward onto the next phase of his career. So truthfully, breaking this fight down, I think this is the toughest fight for Khamzat. I think this is the toughest fight for Gilbert. And I think that the size advantage that Khamzat has will play to his advantage. And I have Khamzat Chimaev, ranked number 11 in the world, taking on number 2, Gilbert Burns, beating Gilbert Burns. But betting lines are one thing. That's a completely different discussion for another day. But Gilbert Burns is a massive underdog in this fight. So if you're playing with your money, I'm not telling you who to bet on. I'm out of that loop. But, man, Gilbert Burns is a big, big underdog heading into this fight. I think that's a little crazy. Moving on to the co-main event of the evening, Aljamain Sterling, the UFC bantamweight champion. Whether you believe it, whether I believe it, doesn't matter. He is the UFC bantamweight champion going into this fight. He's taken on Petr Yan in a rematch of their bout that took place quite a long time ago. Feels like it was a very long time ago. That first bout has put this division on pause, on a hiatus that has been awkward to discuss when discussing the UFC bantamweight division and other fights within the division. It's tough to do that because we're talking about a division where we don't know who the real champ is. We don't know. Aljamain Sterling was fighting Petr Yan. He was losing pretty badly. And Petr Yan landed an illegal knee to a downed opponent that put the win in the column of Aljamain Sterling's win column. So that moment was very tough to watch because Petr Yan didn't have to do that, didn't need to do that. There was no reason to do that. He did that. He came up short. And we had to go down this whole rabbit hole of a situation where Petr Yan had to fight Sandhagen. Aljamain Sterling was on ice, recovering from that injury and a variety of others. And here we are. I think 2 things. I know for a fact that every single fighter that heads into their fight are taking their fight seriously. That goes without saying. These guys train, and these ladies especially train unlike any other athlete. But if I were to just pick a fight, if you were to ask me, okay, what two fighters are going to train their tails off for this fight? I think it would be Aljamain Sterling, and I think it'd be Petr Yan. I think both of these guys are pissed off. They feel like they're disrespected by the hardcore MMA fans and even the casual MMA fans. They just feel disrespected. They feel like they have a lot to prove heading into this one. Yan feels like he lost a fight he was winning, and Sterling feels like he's not regarded as the regular lineal bantamweight champ. And they're both right. I mean, you can't call that one a win for Yan because he threw an illegal technique. And you can't call it a win for Aljo because he was getting his butt whooped in that fight. He was not winning that fight. It was not going in the right direction for him. So I think that this fight will feature two guys that are going to be going at it for a good 15, 20 minutes, maybe even the full 25 minutes and 5-minute rounds, being that this is a title fight. But I do expect the more technical fighter, the fighter that is more well-rounded that is, and not just striking, not just wrestling, not just jiu-jitsu, not just Muay Thai, but well-rounded in every martial art. Who is the better martial artist out of these two fighters, out of Petr Yan and Aljamain Sterling? That, to me, is Petr Yan. And I think Aljo is going into this one thinking that he is the man, that he's ready for the moment. Maybe he is ready for the moment, but I know one thing. For whatever reason, as dominant as Aljo looked against Corey Sandhagen, he was not the same guy in there against Petr Yan. Whoever that guy was, hopefully he doesn't show up on Saturday night for this rematch. Last and not least, of course, the main event. That is Alexander Volkanovski and the Korean Zombie Chan Sung Jung. The best nickname that I've ever heard in fighting, the Korean Zombie, no doubt about it. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that this is the biggest fight of Chan Sung Jung's career, and this was a title shot that he didn't necessarily earn in the sense that he wasn't the number one rated contender for that division. He's about third or fourth in the division. Max Holloway was hurt. Ortega obviously had just come off a loss to Volkanovski. So the options are dwindling for Volkanovski to defend his belt against because he's beaten pretty much everybody. But I think the Korean Zombie is going to make this one a fight. I think Volkanovski is smart. He will not stand toe-to-toe with a guy that they refer to as the Korean Zombie. They refer to him as such for a reason. He's tough, he's durable, he's nasty. And I feel like if Volkanovski was smart, he'd take that fight to the ground, impose his will, beat him down, and hope that Korean Zombie just eventually wears down and wins this fight either on the scorecards or forces the Korean Zombie to eventually not necessarily quit, but puts him in a bad position to maybe force him to tap or chokes him, puts him to sleep. So I think that this is a fun fight. Volkanovski, I will say, he has a little bit of a likability problem in terms of just how the UFC has promoted him or lack thereof. A lot of champions are known in this sport, and he's one of them that, despite the fact that he's defended the belt X amount of times, not that many people really know who he is, and that's not necessarily his fault. It's just something that I noticed. So UFC 273 tomorrow night. Those are my fight picks. Volkanovski, I have winning over the Korean Zombie. I'm going to go with Petr Yan over Aljamain Sterling. Gilbert Burns over Khamzat Chimaev over Gilbert Burns. And I have Mackenzie Dern beating Tasha Torres. There you have it. Enjoy the fights.